penis is evil. The gun is good. Immortal lines. From an immortal movie, really. Woo. I don't even know where to start with that. No. So, okay. Here's the thing. Gonna open up your Q&A here with something a little strange. And I think, I'm pretty sure I reviewed this movie at some point, like for a climax, at some point on Sovereigntech. I can't remember when. It must have been years ago. So we are talking about Zardoz. Okay. And we're going to, don't worry. We have great questions to get into and we're going to get into them, but I got to talk about this for a minute. Even if you are not, say, a cinephile or a movie aficionado or dilettante, Zardoz is one of those movies that you just have to watch. You have to stare at with amazement. Because, I mean, it seems to be a miracle that it exists. Now, granted, all right, so it's a science fiction movie, heavy on the fiction. It's a science fiction movie made in 1974, starring Sean Connery, just after he had gotten done being, with his tenure as James Bond, being one of the most popular actors in the history of the world. And ironically, after that, he basically, nobody was taking him because everybody basically saw him as typecasted as James Bond. So, he was more or less taking any role that kind of landed for him. And he, at this time, Sean Connery would take quite a few very strange roles. Movies that are, Outland's a little more straight to head. He would do Time Bandits. Of course, he would do Highlander, which would actually be there's an irony in that he would eventually do Highlander, because in Zardoz, it's all about, the problems of immortality, but then in Highlander, it's all about the glory of immortality, right? I mean, it's pretty amazing that he would play both roles. Of course, he would also do Highlander 2, and, less said about that, the better. But regardless, this is before Sean Connery had gray hair, which is hard for some of us to remember. I mean, get to the 90s, and Sean Connery is one of the most well-regarded actors of all time. Of course, he hasn't made a movie in forever. Pretty much after League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, he kind of fell off the map, which is a shame because I actually love that movie. I cannot say that I love Zardoz. I will admit, so Ellen and I ended up watching this a couple nights ago. And I mean, she begged to watch it. And partly because I was telling her about it, and I'm like, you don't understand how fucking weird this movie is, right? Now, I have only seen the movie in my life previous to this a couple times. I think I saw it on the Sci-Fi Channel when I was a teenager. Of course, it was a heavily edited version of it. And then I would, years later, almost a decade later, perhaps, on a fateful Christmas day, and I'm not kidding, I would end up watching it with who at the time was my father-in-law, now ex-father-in-law, of course. He bought the DVD, which that DVD now sells for almost $100 a pop. It is quite rare. Actually, getting your hands on this movie in any physical format is a little bit of a pain in the ass, or at least to get it in a physical format that has any kind of special features. Arrow Video, which has done a great job with releasing a lot of films lately, including RoboCop. They did that big release of RoboCop. They did the release, I believe they were the ones that did the release of Big Trouble in Little China in December. They also recently did a stunning release of one of my favorite 90s little action flicks. And not your over-the-top kind of, Stallone or Schwarzenegger action flick, but a little action flick with some great car chases known as Ronin with Robert De Niro. Tremendous, tremendous little film. Anyway, Arrow Video does a great job of 4K restorations. I think they're a European company. Sometimes they'll release movies into the States. Actually, they did a great release of Weird Science recently as well, which Ellen and I also happened to watch. That was a trip. I love that movie. But anyway, you can get Arrow Video did do a release in Europe of Zardoz, and they did like a full 4K restoration, the whole thing. I'd love to see that, but of course it's in fucking region 2. And I'm just not at the point. I'm kind of hoping they'll just release it in America. I'm not at the point where, I mean, I like this movie. I care about this movie after a fashion, but I don't care enough to get a British version of the Blu-ray, then go through the ripping process and whatever. I'm just not at that stage. I'm more hopeful that Arrow Video will just do a local release, or a regional release, I should say. So anyway, this movie, here's the rub with this thing, okay, is that seeing it the third time, and maybe I'm just 15 years older, because it's been 15 years probably since I've really watched the film. I get it now. Like, like I understand this movie. Now, it was a passion project. And I mean, balls to bone, this was made by John Boorman. And I mean, he wrote it, produced it, directed it, the whole thing. This is a John Boorman film through and through. There is no writer. It is not based off of a book, though John Boorman would do a novelization, which I happen to have, and I am very intrigued by. I've never read it. I didn't know there was a novelization until recently, but I did get my hands on it. Now, probably part of the reason that John Boorman was even able to make this very fucking weird science fiction movie. Again, this is pre-Star Wars, and would come out around the same time actually as Logan's Run, which I will defend, and I love the fuck out of that movie. I used to make the statement that was like the only real science fiction movie before Star Wars, even though Star Wars isn't actually science fiction, and eventually I'd see Forbidden Planet and I'd eat my own words. Because every science fiction movie is basically based off of Forbidden Planet. So every science fiction property is basically based off of Forbidden Planet, at least video property. So anyway, Zardoz would come out in 1974, just after John Boorman had made Deliverance, which is considered one of the greatest movies ever made, was wildly popular with both critics, and did tremendous money back in the 1970s. And so basically Boorman was given carte blanche. You know, the studio said, hey, here's $1.5 million. And that's incredible to consider that Zardoz was made for, you know, that any science fiction movie would be made for $1.5 million before the democratization of CGI and, other technologies for movie making. I mean, now, if you gave an indie filmmaker $1.5 million, they could make one hell of a gorgeous science fiction film. As to where, in 1974, that was still pretty low budget. I mean, for perspective, Star Wars was made for $10 million, which is also amazing in and of itself. But I mean, there's ways that they saved money on that by basically using older cameras, a lot of different stuff within it. But just so you understand, I mean, this is admittedly a low budget film. At the same time, while it's a low budget film, the amount of film, and this runs almost 2 hours, about an hour and 50. The amount of film, the amount of things that happen in it and what gets explored is very impressive, in my opinion. I mean, you're getting, the concept of bang for the buck, right? Like, you think of the fact, I mean, for a corollary, you think of, like a novel, right? However much your average paperback novel used to cost, $7-8, okay, back in the day. You could buy for $7-8, you could buy Fahrenheit 451, which is a great, one of the greatest books ever written, okay, and well worth the $8. But admittedly, it's a short book, right? Barely weighing it at a couple hundred pages, if that. Or you could buy a 1,400 page opus like Battlefield Earth by the rightfully maligned L. Ron Hubbard, but a great goddamn book. Point being is like, okay, you spend the same amount of money, but you get so much more book when you go with Battlefield Earth. As crazy and as wild an adventure. And I think the book, again, the movie Battlefield Earth is, well, that's one of the few movies that Zardoz is, I think, unquestionably better than. Okay. That movie's a fucking dive. Ellen, would you say that is Zardoz a better film than Battlefield Earth?
It's all about leverage.
Leverage. Yeah. All right, you little cyclo. No. Did you don't have a rating yet for Zardoz, do you? Out of 10?
I'd give it a solid 7.
Solid 7. That's pretty high. Okay. All right. Solid 7 out of 10. Thank you, Ellen. A solid 7. All right. 7 out of 10. Yeah. So did you have anything you want to say about it, or are you good? No, you're good. Okay. All right. Some other time. All right. Some other time, because it is a wild movie. Anyway. Okay. So 7 out of 10. Boy, what would I give it out of 10? Again, we're going to get into questions here, folks. I think that's fair. I think I'm going to go with Ellen on this one. Probably a 7 out of 10. Because I mean, I really, just on its originality and on the fact that it's a movie that just shouldn't fucking exist, I really want to give it a lot more. I mean, the only thing I can really compare it to, and in fact, a lot of it feels like David Lynch. Of course, again, it was John Borman. The only thing I can really compare it to is Dune, which of course they had like a $40 million budget, which was practically unheard of back in the 80s. But I mean, where Dune doesn't, in fact, this speaks to why this movie, I think, is most people just don't get it. Because now that I get Zardoz, now that I think I should say that I understand what it's putting on display. You know, it's not just a wacky ass movie anymore. Okay. I mean, it still is, but that's why I say it's not just, all right. It's still ridiculous and you know, pretentious and trying to be very, you know, artsy and it doesn't exactly work. So even while Zardoz has a story to it, a very cohesive story, actually, and I think it has a point, it is dealing with very deep philosophical themes. It doesn't hold up like Dune, because Dune, David Lynch's Dune, looks awesome and has really, like, some of the dialogue, because both movies have some ridiculous dialogue, Zardoz and Dune, but there's moments of dialogue in Dune that are fucking epic, totally quotable, and that you could go around, you know, and that you could absolutely apply in everyday life. I mean, there's some quotes in Zardoz, but it's not to the level of Dune. Also, Dune has an amazing soundtrack, which Zardoz, I think part of how they did how they got away with a $1.5 million budget is that they used, I don't think it even really had a composer. Like, they used Beethoven and they used other stuff. So, because that's not Toto, right? That's for damn sure. So they're both ridiculous films. The scenes don't necessarily the story doesn't seem to exactly flow in either film. But again, Dune just has a look that is so grandiose and so legit that you're able to take it a lot more seriously, even though it really shouldn't work as a film. In fact, I remember Harlan Ellison saying about Dune, you know, it's the movie that shouldn't exist. It shouldn't have been shot, but somehow it's there. And he loved Dune. He loved David Lynch's Dune. And he is a hard movie critic to please, let me assure you. But frankly, every copy of Dune that gets put out there should have Harlan Ellison's review or, you know, little quotes about it on the packaging, because if he liked it, you've got something really fucking special there. Even though he admits that, like, it's a very flawed presentation overall. Just the fact that it could exist, that you could even try to put Dune, and certainly it's going to be interesting when we see what Denis Villeneuve does with Dune in coming years. Just the fact that you could pull it off, especially in the 80s, was a minor miracle. So, but of course that was based off of a book. Now, Zardoz, on the other hand, I would argue is a very comparable film in a lot of ways. In fact, a lot of it, again, it's John Borman, but it does feel like David Lynch. It's a very comparable film, but the look of it is so ridiculous, nay humorous, that it's hard to take the movie seriously. You can't, and I think that's really its problem. And it's not just, the fact that Sean Connery, and this is kind of a classic picture of him, it's not just the fact that looks like he's wearing a red diaper with a bandolier and like these thigh-high leather boots and a ponytail and this huge, like handlebar mustache. It's not just that. Okay. Everything about it just looks preposterous. In fact, Ellen in her brilliance was constantly bringing up, like what they're showing there. It's like, why are they making that look like genetic code? That's just, what was it? It wasn't like protozoa or something. It was, Right. It was just a bunch of single-celled organisms, but it's supposed to be like his genetic code and everything that they're showing on the screen. And so, yeah, so it looks ridiculous. Thank you, Ellen. So it's so great to have a scientist as a girlfriend. Anyway, yeah, the movie, like everything it's trying to do, I get it. It's trying to do it within a budget too. So it just looks ridiculous. But ultimately what the movie is, I know I've been saying all this, I've been talking about it for 15 minutes and I haven't said what the fuck the movie is about. What I have come to realize that the movie is about, and I haven't even really caught a whole lot of other people online. I went looking. I'm like, I want to see if some people have had to have done essays on this fucking thing. And nobody else seems to get it, but it clicked finally. In fact, the movie is eventually blatant of what it is. It is the story of the Übermensch. This is it's basically Das Sprech Zarathustra. You know, it's Nietzsche. I mean that's what the film is. In fact, the Sean Connery's character, the lead character, Zed, quotes Nietzsche in the film. Like, I mean, he just outright. And it's kind of the turning point of the film when he does it. So I think it's absolutely blatant because there's constant references to, you know, how Zed killed his god. He had to kill his god. He kills himself, the old version of himself. There's a slew of other little hints throughout it. The fact that he is like this genetically, like he's a mutant. He's a new type of man that's even more powerful than the Eternals in the film, which are, you know, the rich and powerful that were preserving the past. And he has to kill the past. I mean, like there's all this stuff within it. It's basically the coming of the Superman. That's all that the movie is, or not all that it is, but that's the bulk of what it is. And it's not, and this is the one, oh man. You know, there's no doubt. So Nietzsche's sister, okay, we got to bring some clarity to this. Nietzsche was not a Nazi. He did not support Nazism. Okay. The Nazis co-opted Nietzsche's works, and not only co-opted, but Nietzsche's sister, who posthumously published a lot of his stuff. There's a little bit of a problem with Nietzsche's later works because we don't exactly know. I mean, we can kind of guess, but we don't exactly know how much of what Nietzsche, I mean, despite the fact that he went nuts later in life, but how much Nietzsche is Nietzsche, because some of it might be his sister's additions because she was a Nazi, as in she was a member of the party. Okay. It is almost a crime of history that Nietzsche is associated in the popular consciousness with Nazism, that the Übermensch is associated with Nazism, because it's not. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It is literally the opposite of Nazism, because it would not allow for there's no collectivism in the concept of the Übermensch. None. In fact, I would argue there isn't much in the way of violence in the concept of the Übermensch. And I want to give credit to Zardoz for, I think, displaying that. Because when Zed finally comes into his own power, okay, not power over, power inside, right? When he comes, because he goes through the whole movie carrying a gun. And then suddenly when he becomes, when he realizes the truth of everything, he no longer wants to use the gun. And in fact, he has the opportunity to kill. He's even specifically asked with consent by, one of the Eternals, kill me, please. I want to die. I don't want to be immortal anymore. Kill me. And he won't do it. He's done. And he explicitly says that, the old me is washed away. And the very last shot of the movie Zardoz, which, and I could get into, I'm still kind of like chewing on, and Ellen and I have been talking for the past couple of days about this movie. It's so engrossing when you're trying to figure out what it's trying to say. The very last shot of the movie is the rusted revolver that he was carrying the whole time. It's rusted when Zed's son, who I think is clearly meant to be, the total Übermensch, right? And there's more there. I think that there's like an allusion to Seth, and anyway, that gets into a bunch of stuff. But I haven't really seen where anybody else, has kind of written up an essay that explains a lot of this. But the fact that the gun is left hanging and rusted, and that Zed's son is meant to be the future of humanity, that, violence, the use of violence, no more. It's gone. How could that possibly be Nazism, right? It's not. Okay. And so I want to give Borman credit that I think he really encapsulated a lot of what the Übermensch is really about in this weird ass, you can't take it seriously film. In fact, I mean, to Borman's credit, he probably knew, because he's a great director. He probably knew you couldn't, that he kind of failed on being able to take it seriously. And that's why he has the intro with Arthur Frayn's head floating around, where Arthur Frayn says, some of this is, sarcastic, or, some of it is meant to, he's basically saying it's not even meant to be taken, like what you see is not really meant to be taken seriously, but what you're told and the abstract of the story overall is very serious. Yeah, in that sense, I think it's actually a brilliant film, because you'll never, ever, ever get away today with making a movie that shows Nietzsche's philosophy, or that shows any real philosophy. You'll never get away with anything that has a budget anyway. I'm sure there's a million indie films that might do that, but fuck, even Atlas Shrugged fucked up. They had to bake in the Catholic Church and all this other crap into part 3. Oh, what a piece of shit. From what is genuinely, I think, a great novel, regardless of whether or not I like Ayn Rand. So yeah, this movie is brilliant in its own way. And once you understand Nietzsche, the real Nietzsche, not the Nietzsche that the popular consciousness wants you to think is a Nazi and blah, blah, blah. And when you actually listen to they people who couldn't harm a fly. And you look at him and they even tell you, no, he wasn't a Nazi at all. He wouldn't support them for a second. And his sister is the one that fucked all this shit up and blah, blah, blah. And if somebody wants to say to me that they thought, even though he could be considered the anti-philosopher, if somebody wanted to say to me that Nietzsche was like the greatest philosopher ever, I wouldn't argue much. So much of what he said and Stirner said are very, very similar. And Zardoz puts all of that. That's really what it's about, but it's just so hokey. It's such a weird looking film that even when you get the philosophy, it's like, well, it's poor packaging, like as good a job as it does, alluding to it and putting so much on display. It's just terribly poor packaging. So now that you know what this movie's about, if you haven't watched it in a while, or if you've never seen it, I think, like I said at the top, whether you're a cinephile or not, this is such a unique movie. There is literally nothing like it before or since. You got to watch it. You got to see this weird shit. But grasp, there's this weird scene where he's walking back through all the statues, right? They have, because, this civilization behind the vortexes that's immortal. It's supposed to be all the best of humanity. And well, they end up becoming apathetic or other things. They have no sex drive. There's tons of nudity in this, of course. I think that there's a point to actually a lot of that. And I want to give credit to the idea that when there's the transmission of knowledge, that it comes along with a lot of sex, and basically almost an orgy and things like this. There's things there to explore, but I actually want to read the novel to see what light, because that was written by Borman and a ghostwriter, but Borman was key to it. I want to see what that adds to the understanding of the movie. But no one's ever going to be able to really take this seriously. But no, so I was getting at with the statues. There's a ton of Greek statues and everything, and they're getting destroyed when the Eternals basically go nuts. But then as Zed walks past them, the statues come back together. Now, it's a weird scene, and why is that happening? But I think it's really suggestive of the fact that, because Nietzsche was obsessed with Greek culture, absolutely obsessed. He thought that they had it right. They had it figured out. Okay. And so I think that is a way of showing, okay, here comes the future man, right? Here comes the Superman, the Übermensch, and he is going to restore what the Greeks figured out. And you basically literally seeing, or metaphorically seeing that in the film through the statues kind of coming back together. Again, you've got to have that knowledge to understand what the fuck this movie is trying to say. But once you do, it really becomes a very different animal, because otherwise it's just a strange movie. I mean, and it's something, I mean, this was something that was happening in the 60s and 70s anyway, basically where directors were trying to make movies without writers. So if you thought that this was John Boorman doing that, I would understand. And I think most people would be like, yeah, oh, that must be a case of that, right? Where that's what they're doing, or it's something like The Holy Mountain, or Ellen was even saying, it's like she thought it was a movie that you need to watch on acid or something, but don't do it. Yeah, don't do it. Yeah, because some of the shit's weird. I mean, yeah, it'd be terrifying if you're on that shit. Yeah, good point. So anyway, there's your warning. But really, watch this. And with that understanding, and suddenly the movie clicks, and it's not such a strange film. I mean, it still is, but it's not just. Yeah, that's what I've got to say on it. And I wanted to talk about it because this is one of those movies everybody kind of knows, or not everybody, but many people, especially science fiction fans and so on, kind of know about it, but they all sort of agree, like, what the fuck is that? Or if they like it because it is ridiculous. But I think Boorman was really trying to lay some, I mean, I love John Boorman's work. I mean, I'm never going to watch Deliverance again in my fucking life, but Excalibur, I watch Excalibur all the time. I thought that was a tremendous film that he put on display. Some would argue equally weird, but I think Boorman's got a flair. He's got a flavor, that I point blank. I mean, like all kinds of, they're just amazing movies. I mean, I don't know how you feel about Exorcist 2, but who else could you put in that? Who else could you get to do something like that? That's a tall order, baby. Anyway, man, just another quick update. I picked up this week. There was that weird, just a little more, actually, this is a little gaming news. So you're getting a mix. Movies, games, we're going to get into some tech questions here. We got all kinds of good stuff to get into in your Q&A as usual. But I mentioned, Rob and I, we did TIE Fighter Renegades this past week. And I mentioned that Nintendo did that mini direct on Thursday, on March 26, 2020. And they announced out of nowhere, I mean, there was kind of some hints that Jedi Knight 2 is going to be coming out. In fact, I mentioned it in the Telegram group, the Sovereign Tech Telegram group. Also, we're getting Castlevania Season 4, by the way. Woo, all right. Anyway, best show on TV. But I mentioned that, I had hinted that, or there were hints, I should say, I think for the PS4, that Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy was going to be coming out. Classic Star Wars game from 2006, something like that. Yeah. Okay. And we're like, well, they announced that it would come out for PlayStation and for Switch, and boy, did it. And hot damn. I mean, I've just been like salivating getting to play this again. It has a great, I mean, the single player is tremendous in itself. The multiplayer, best lightsaber combat, hands down. In fact, when we talked about on TIE Fighter Renegades, Rob, bolstered that point. I mean, just phenomenal. And the multiplayer, oh, fuck. Yesterday I was rocking it. I was actually going to record this yesterday, but then I was like, God damn it, I need to relax. And I need to have some fun. And not that this isn't fun to do. But I was playing that. I mean, it is absolutely worth it. And it is remarkable that you can play. I mean, here's the magic of the Switch, right? Is that it's portable. That's everything. It's all in one, and you have so many different like controller configurations and everything. But the fact that it's portable and that granted, you could play Jedi Knight on just about any, frankly, weak ass laptop that you can imagine today. And that would technically make it portable, but to have like really great controls all in one complete package, and to play it handheld, not so much portable, but handheld. That is a minor miracle and is, pun intended, a game changer. That's really the magic of the Switch, is that you're playing all of these AAA titles, even ancient ones, but you're doing it in a handheld mode and it's right there and you're getting all the modern connectivity, like the ability to do multiplayer and everything. It is really brilliant. But man, Jedi Academy plays, I mean, the graphics look like shit, you know, by comparison to today, but I think it still looks, it totally works, still looks solid, and just plays like a goddamn dream on Switch anyway. I mean, I don't know, like to play it on a PS4, I feel like that there's nothing special about that. I'll just play it because just about everybody has a computer that could play Jedi Academy. I mean, your computer could be 10 years old and you could play Jedi Academy, you know, on max settings. So you could easily, and for much cheaper, get it on GOG. I can't imagine the appeal to playing it on PlayStation 4, but on Switch to have it portable. Oh, that's dynamite. That's awesome. The Panzer Dragoon remake also came out of nowhere. It was supposed to come out in December originally, I thought. But no, they ended up releasing it early. Now it does not have the updated soundtrack in it, but I love this game. It's one of the 2 games I can really deeply remember playing in Toys R Us back in the 90s when it first came out. Of course, it originally came out for the Sega Saturn. 25 years later or so, I still think this is an amazing game. I think the asking price for it is a little ridiculous, you know, $25 for a game that, because here's the thing, I forgot. And I think it's because I confused like Panzer Dragoon 1 with Panzer Dragoon 2, Zwei or whatever that was called. But Panzer Dragoon 1 is a really short game. Like, I mean, you can beat it easy in an hour. I mean, really. And that's okay. I make short, I mean, you know, the games I've made in the past, you can easily beat in an hour or 2. I like short games. I just think the asking price is a little high for not a whole lot of game ultimately, that you're getting. But it's stunning. I think it looks great. I mean, they're not, you know, the most impressive graphics fucking ever, but I think it's a very, very nice update. Admittedly, I think the original graphics with like the really harsh polygons, not the smoothed over polygons, I think it's very charming. And I still to this day think that like really simple polygons, the sharp edge polygons, you think like Virtua Fighter 1 or Virtua Racing, which is also great on the Switch, by the way. That's a classic. And maybe it's just the time that I grew up in, but when I see those really harsh polygons, it feels more like the future. Like somehow it seems more advanced, like making it look lifelike almost defeats the purpose, right? I want to make a comparison within Star Trek, where I think if you make Star Trek look too advanced based on UIs that we're used to, it doesn't feel like the future. But then when you look at the original series and there's all these, you know, like blinking lights and switches and everything, somehow that actually looks like the future, you know, and that looks like, wow, that's really advanced. I don't know what the fuck's that is doing, as to where now when you watch Star Trek, it's like, oh yeah, I get what they're doing there. And it's not as impressive. So to some degree, I feel like making things almost look more lifelike or to mimic what we're used to more or less today is actually less impressive, you know? So I wish, and maybe they'll put this in a patch at some point for the Panzer Dragoon remake. I really wish they'd give you the option to play the original graphics, but I wouldn't be surprised if really they just remade the game from the ground up. And so that's why the original graphics aren't even possible, because technically it's not even the original game. I would believe that. I do hope that the third Panzer Dragoon game, which was the RPG that they lost the code for, if they're just rebuilding these games and remaking them from the ground up, I hope they remake the third one. We know we're getting the second one, but I really hope they remake the third one, because that's a game that, I mean, actually I wanted a Sega Saturn Mini just to play Panzer Dragoon 3. You know, like it's because it's widely considered not just the greatest Panzer Dragoon game, but one of the greatest games ever made. The problem is very few people have ever actually been able to play it. So I hope that changes. But anyway, let's get into our just some fun stuff happening with games. It's been a while. I got to say this. Both of these games, it's been a while since I've had like the drive where I mean, I love video games, but like where, holy shit, I gotta play, and like, you're getting that crack addiction version of video games, right? That feeling. It has been a long, long time since I have had that feeling. Maybe a couple years ago, like when Samus Returns came out, I definitely kind of felt that. Ended up getting a 3DS just to play it. That's how hungry I was for it. But it's, bottom line, it's been a long, long time since I felt like this kind of, desire. And man, was I feeling it this week. As soon as I was just waiting for Jedi Academy to come out because I wanted to jump on it. And worth it. Totally worth it. Anyway, so aside from walking around looking like a TIE fighter pilot and dual wielding lightsabers, red ones, of course, let's get into our questions here. This is actually a comment or a thought, kind of a question from the Telegram group that I think is that I want to bring to fore here by an absolutely brilliant listener and very long time listener. So here we go. Took me long enough to get to episode 367, which was the most recent one, I believe. Anyway, but when you spoke about CD graphics and missed the days when you could take in quote unquote old, or at the time existing, protocol and try to layer additional things onto it to make the most of it, you're actually still living in these times. Bitcoin, a decade plus old protocol, which exists alongside Ethereum and more modern, quote unquote, modern protocols, is still layering additional functionality on top of it. Even back in the day with colored coins, that is very analogous to graphics on CD. Anyway, just a thought. I wanted to bring this up. You are totally right. I mean, like, I'm not even going to argue this for a second. Like, you are absolutely right that Bitcoin, but notice, and actually the colored coins example is great. And in fact, I think in the past, at the very least on Q&As, I've brought this point up that I miss really stretching the protocol on its own without even having to do Lightning Network, which I have no problem with Lightning Network. Don't misunderstand me. I'm very supportive. I miss these great ideas of just like really, very simply adding on to the protocol of Bitcoin, like with colored coins. I was supportive of that when it first came out. And ultimately I wouldn't mind if it still somehow took shape. Because I think it's a brilliant idea. So yeah, I'm not going to argue this for a minute. You're absolutely right. Now, the point I want to make is that, I mean, there's a few things to talk about here, but kind of the first point I want to make is that the only, and I wish it wasn't so. The only technology that I really am supportive of and that I approve of its continued development and taking it farther, including with Lightning Network or whatever, is Bitcoin. And I pretty much never, there was a time years ago where all right, let's be clear here. So maybe 5 years ago, 2015, something like that, maybe earlier, I was on board with seeing what other cryptocurrencies could do and what they could, bring to the table. And I was never negative on Bitcoin. I mean, I might have had concerns around what some of the development team was doing, but then everybody was, what was that guy's name? Not Mike O'Hearn. That's the, that's the bodybuilder. That guy, you know who I'm talking about. Okay. Who was, what do you have, Bitcoin XT or whatever that he was trying to do. I had some concerns around some of the developers involved, and I didn't like that Gavin Andreessen was wanting to get away from, the black flag waving roots of Bitcoin. But overall, I've always been supportive of Bitcoin, 100%. I'm totally on board with Lightning. SegWit, all of it, I'm on. I love it. But the sad part is, it's like the only technology that I can talk about positively. Like it's the only still developing technology that I can talk about positively. And there are other older protocols that I wish people were still really doing a whole hell of a lot more with, like with IRC and other things. So, I hear you and I don't disagree with you. And I always talk positively about Bitcoin and its continued development. The thing is, I feel like when there's only one, maybe two exceptions to the rule, the rule still stands, right? I mean, like you might as well, for example, there might be, one or two, or hell, look, even if there's 10 great movies that get made in a year, the amount of movies, just in one language, we don't even have to go into foreign film, the amount of movies that get made in a year today, 10 out of 1,000 or thousands of films that get made every year. And it's literally that many movies getting made. Indie studios, major studios, whatever. Like that. I don't like going down this road, because I think, depending upon context, there's points where this matters. But in this context, as far as like saying things quickly on the radio, okay, or over audio on a podcast, like it's statistically insignificant. Like to say that there are 10 good movies that came out this year in comparison to the amount of movies that came out this year or in 2019, or pick your year. It's okay to just make the blanket statement, Hollywood fucking sucks. Do you get what I'm saying? Just like TV shows. Okay. In fact, I mentioned it earlier, Castlevania. All right, great. Castlevania's out there. Okay. Every time I say that TV is shit, somebody mentions either Castlevania or The Expanse. 2 shows out of the hundreds, if not thousands of networks out there. 2 good shows not out of thousands of shows, out of thousands of networks. That is statistically insignificant. You understand? Even though they're 2 of the best shows ever made, that is statistically insignificant. Why would I argue with anyone about the idea that, if they make the statement that TV sucks today, yeah, when there's only 2 good shows, the statement stands. TV sucks. Now, I'm getting hot and bothered here, okay? And I'm not like mad at the listener at all. I get you. You're not wrong. I just, and I'm sounding way more heated than I am, I think. You're not wrong. It's just, it doesn't happen at the level, because there are so few independent protocols, independent infrastructures, independent technologies today compared to what was in the 90s. And that's why it doesn't feel the same, because you're totally right. Bitcoin is absolutely, and colored coin being an analogy or comparable to like the concept of color coins. Absolutely. Right. Like a great idea that just, nobody really like bothered to do much with. There might've been a couple wallets that were like Prism and other ones that were created to try and take advantage of it. It just didn't take off. And okay. Just like CD graphics, that part of the protocol. You're totally right. You're 100% right. It's just, everything feels like it's all on the same platform, and that's really the issue. I mean, just like today, we were just talking about video games. This is another great area of comparison. Like in the 90s, you had so many different consoles. You had the CDI, you had the 3DO, you had the Saturn. I mean, just within like the 4th and 5th generations of consoles, you had tons of consoles. You had consoles that never even made it out of Japan. They were fucking wild. They were amazing, and now we're basically stuck with 3, minus the PC. I mean, yeah, you could argue the 3DS and the Vita might still be somewhat viable. And anyway, you could say previous console generations that maybe don't rely upon an online store of any kind, might still be a thing. And certainly people have tried over the past decade to like be a 4th or 5th entrant into the triad of consoles that we have, right? I mean, you could think the Ouya and some others that really did, I think, give the college try. And you have it going today as well. I mean, the Intellivision is trying to be something. I don't know. The latest trailer I saw did not bolster any real confidence in me. And you can't, okay, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say you can't make a console around one game because, of course, in television is supposed to get the 3rd or technically 4th, whatever, Earthworm Jim game, and it's going to be an exclusive for it. A, that game has to be amazing. B, granted, yes, like the original Xbox, I think totally we used to call it the Halo box, because basically that's all anybody had the Xbox for was for Halo, right? And I understand why, because it was that great of a game. It really was the beautiful game. I don't know that Earthworm Jim is going to, the third Earthworm Jim is going to deliver on that, but anyway, I wasn't given much confidence with what I've seen recently. But point being is that you had, not just different protocols, but you had and not just platforms. And I think this is important to different. And I appreciate, of course, the person that sent this question. I have the utmost, as much respect for a human being as I could have. I have for the person that responded with this, about Colored Coin and Bitcoin. I think it's important. I'm glad that he's done this from time to time where, he'll give me a little challenge, and I like it. Okay. Because it makes me think about it. It helps me hone down my language, because we need to talk about kind of like how recently on Sovereign Tech, I've set up different levels, right? Like we have threat level 1, threat level 2, threat level 3, threat level 4. And what I think I'm really complaining about with a lot of present technology, okay, and we're talking 30-foot viewing it, very abstract here. There are protocols, right? Like Bitcoin, even though I would argue Bitcoin's even a little more than a protocol, or a lot more than a protocol, like it's a philosophy, it's a lot of things. And anyway, Bitcoin anyway, you have protocols, right? Which even those are in short supply, I think, of differing protocols that we could take advantage of. But then you don't just have protocols, then you have platforms underneath that, which are bigger, like protocols kind of at the lower level. Then you have platforms. And then beyond platforms, and this is my own kind of technical breakdown. This isn't one that would pass muster at MIT or anything. But then, so you have protocol, platform, and then infrastructure. Right? And infrastructure is the level of, say, the internet and all of its fiber and all of its servers, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's the thing that's really, that's kind of pissing me off and frustrating me, is that there aren't even a lot of options as far as infrastructure goes. Because, for the example with games, you had again, in the 90s, in the same generation, right? You have different generations of consoles, like the Genesis and Super Nintendo were one generation. The Saturn, N64, and PlayStation 1 were another generation. Then GameCube, Xbox, and PS2 was another generation, right? Okay. Within the same generation, you had, 10, 12 different consoles. I mean, it was insane. You had the Jaguar, you had the Atari Jaguar, you had the 3DO. You had tons. And each one of those consoles was ultimately an infrastructure. It wasn't just a platform. I mean, we might use the term platform for them, but really they were an entire infrastructure. For example, like I would say the Sega Genesis was an infrastructure that allowed for the Sega CD, which would be a platform, and the 32X, which would perhaps be a platform. Anyway, we don't need to get lost in that. But I want you to, I'm trying to explain that what's frustrating me is ultimately with tech right now is that there are not a lot of options when it comes to infrastructure. That's what's really pissing me off, is that, and that's what's kind of unsettling me. And frankly, I don't think I could have put words to it until you brought up this point. And so I'm incredibly thankful for that, because I think this is something that's going to help with sovereign text messaging going forward. The internet is one infrastructure. I want others. Okay. Now that's not new messaging for me. I've been clamoring for multiple internets pretty much since the show began, that I've wanted that, and we're just still not getting it. Okay. Now I get it. It's an expensive proposition, just like comparably the video game consoles during the 90s I mean, today they still are, but certainly back then they were expensive propositions. I mean, $500 today for a PlayStation up my ass, whatever number, is seen as a lot of money, right? Now, $500 today compared to $500 in 1995, those are two very different numbers, right? Like they equate to two very different things. $500 back in 1995 is a whole hell of a lot more money. Okay. Even though gas prices might not make you think that. I can't believe I saw gas for, was a $1.80. Rumor has it there's going to be places where it could be under $1. That's insane. Anyway, COVID-19. There, I said it. Shit. Anyway, the Philips CDI, which was a console in the 90s and actually is what inspired the whole conversation around CD graphics, in the 90s cost $500. It actually cost more depending upon the configuration you got or what you added on, right? Because you could add on the full motion video card and everything into it. I mean, then you'd easily be running into $1,000. That's in the 90s, that's a fuck ton of money. So the reason, and that's part of the reason that it didn't take off, even though they allowed for like installments, right? They allowed you to make payments on a thing because they knew that was a ton of money. And there's no way that the average person, like they could not get the network effect they wanted if they had to charge everybody flat fee straight up, $500, $600, $800, whatever. So they broke it up into payments. Okay. Like I get that. And I get that price, what it costs to do something is a barrier for a lot of things. Totally understood. It's not always the case, right? Like the cost of doing data packet radio, that's not expensive to work on that protocol, right? And, it doesn't necessarily allow for, instantaneous back and forth, right? For example, if you did anything that looks remotely like store and forward, right? Like on a network. But regardless, yes, it's going to be expensive to do, to try these things, to have more infrastructures, but it's worth it. And, for those that have gotten in on Bitcoin to some degree, I know the Bitcoin price is wavering in weird territories right now, but it's worthwhile to put our effort, even if it's expensive, into having these things because the value goes well above, well beyond just in its existence to have more infrastructure, more infrastructures, we should say the plural, goes well beyond the asking price. Like it's almost immeasurable, the value of having, different infrastructures and what can come in the future. And it doesn't have to be a roll of the dice, right? You got to have people that can talk about it. and that's a thing too. Anyway, I could go on forever about this subject, but basically, listener, you're not wrong. Like you're not even, you're totally right. You're totally right in what you're saying. And I do hold on to the idea, the positivity, and the genuinely great things that are happening with Bitcoin. I really do hold on to that. As I don't like the word hope, but for lack of a better word, hope for, us being able to live in the cracks, especially in a time when it feels like, boy, we really need to start living in the cracks. Like this is a wake up call, man, there's so many other things I want to talk about, but we're kind of getting a little later on. Like I feel like there are things that this whole COVID-19 situation is proving when it comes to economy and politics that, if you want me to talk about it, ask me about it. Maybe I'll get into it somewhere. But if someone asks me about it, I'll remember to talk about it. Actually, of course I'm going to remember to talk about it because it's been ruminating in my mind over the past few days. But there are major lessons to be learned from what we're going through right now. And they're lessons that when we learn them, we can come out a lot stronger, and with better plans of action, shall we say. So anyway, I appreciate this question, or this thought. Again, he's totally right. Totally right. And this is one of the things I'll tell you, I've gotten so much positive response, with the Telegram group. People, I mean, just connecting, helping each other out with business, even things as simple as discovering new music. I mean, people have explicitly commented in there saying, wow, I love it. I can just share some music in here. And then I get people sharing, 4 other things with me that are comparable that I didn't even know existed. And now I have a whole ton more great music to listen to while I work. And I think that's dynamite. Art discovery is just one of the most important services that can get provided anywhere. It's not really a service. I mean, it's just like-minded people coming together, but you get my point. That's such a beautiful thing. And I want to get into our album of the week, actually, because I found something that was totally on a lark. I found something that blew my mind. I mean, music that I like, dare I say, core music to me, that I want to share with you. But I just want to, close out that question and thought, basically that, yeah, I'm really hungry for other infrastructures, not just platforms and protocols, whole other infrastructures. And there was a time, where we had those. As great as Bitcoin is, I mean, it's reliant. It doesn't have to be, and maybe it's happening. Maybe there are people out there, and I don't know it. Maybe there's some Bitcoin millionaires out there that are working really hard on creating a completely separate infrastructure for Bitcoin transactions. How that's not order number one, like that should just be what is being worked on. Get it off of the internet. Okay. And truly make it independent. Maybe that's happening and I just don't realize it, but, no one's necessarily talking about it. I mean, yeah, I know people are doing interesting shit with satellites and all that. And, anyway, we something else. Okay. So there's got to be interesting ways to go about this. And maybe I need to start having some conversations with people, but that's really what I think I'm hungering for, is other infrastructures. Okay. Now, seeing as something I'm always hungering for is some new great music. This isn't exactly new. In fact, actually it's almost 30 years old. But I had never heard of this. The reason I'd never heard of this is because apparently this was only any kind of a deal in Canada, but I guess it was a big deal in Canada. I think that's something actually overall, that I think we often ignore, is that, we do have a country, and this is also actually, this is true for a lot of countries. Certainly America has had no problem with the, British invasion of music over the years. I mean, I don't just mean the Beatles. I mean, go down the list, Def Leppard, Judas Priest. I mean, plenty of big deals. But there are a lot of, in Australia, kind of the same deal, right? AC/DC, Rick Springfield, and so on. Airborne, I think, is actually Australian as well. I could be wrong about that. But anyway, there's a country right above us that speaks our language and is in many ways, I mean, not entirely, but in many ways like American culture, just a lot nicer. That again is right above the United States. And there's a lot of music that has come out of Canada that I've recently, I guess I would argue rediscovered, but discovered, that is of the flavors, the genres that I enjoy, that might have been pretty successful up there, but nobody else knows about. In fact, I mean, the most popular example of this is Harum Scarum, where I'm a huge Harum Scarum fan. In fact, they just had a new album come out that was pretty solid recently, and not as good as. So the lead singer of Harum Scarum is Harry Hess. He also has the band First Signal, which is meant to sound like old Harum Scarum. Now, they had an album come out in 2019. That was fucking awesome. I think I already did that as an album of the week in 2019. But regardless, Harum Scarum proper, which also has Hess at the head of it, did come out with a new album this year. That's not what I'm going to talk about. But this is a band most Americans just don't know. They have no idea. They're huge in Canada and Japan, but the rest of the world has no idea who the hell they are. So it's a shame. I think there's a lot of music to come out of. I mean, yeah, there's Avril Lavigne, but anyway, that's not really Avril Lavigne anymore. Anyway, I'm kidding. Half. No. Yeah. There, Ellen just gave me a thumbs up.
You're right.
Yeah. Oh no, I'm right. It's not really Avril Lavigne. Shit. Anyway, but there is another, actually, well, out of Canada, a female rocker who she became a big deal, or she became a big deal in 1991. And in fact, I think it's called the Juno Awards. It's the Canadian version of the Grammys. Okay. I think it's called the Juno Awards. And in 91, she almost won the Juno Award for Album of the Year. But it's a metal album, or a hard rock album, more particularly if you want to get down to brass tacks on it. And her name is Chrissy Steele. Now, she had this album from 1991 is titled Magnet to Steele. Now, there's a song on there with that name, Magnet to Steele, and Steele is spelled Steel in the song. But for the album, because her name is Chrissy Steele, Steele, the album is titled Magnet to Steele, and it has the E at the end of Steele. Okay, like to play on her name, which is clever. Okay, all about attraction, right? I dig it. She had a couple of hits off of this, and it's the first and fourth track on the album. The first is Love You Till It Hurts. Fourth is Love Don't Last Forever. I got to tell you, this is a rare brand of rock, a rare brand of, my use of the word metal is pretty broad. I mean, almost anything with an electric guitar, with a heavy enough electric guitar, I call metal. So if I call this metal, don't mind, but it's okay. It's not Slipknot. All right. So anyway, not even close. The closest I can compare her to actually is to another Canadian act, which was Lee Aaron, who's someone else that I think we ignore. She's a tremendous metal artist. Now, I mean, she's like metal queen. I mean, that's like actually the title of her first or her second album technically, but really her first breakout album, which was Metal Queen. So I think she fits in that, but Chrissy Steele sounds kind of like Lee Aaron, who I've talked about in the past. And both of them really sound like somebody who's very much at the top of my list, that being Kane Roberts. Okay. This is your sex-drenched, loud guitar, pounding drums, music. Okay. Hard rock, metal, whatever. And it's got a gal singing it. And so when she's singing about, it's one thing, and it is great. It's one thing when Kane Roberts has a song called Triple X, and he's talking about how he needs a Triple X lover and all that. That's great. I mean, really, that's great. But when you get the types of like Lee Aaron, or in this case, Chrissy Steele, who are saying, I have a Triple X mind, when it's a woman saying it, it's obviously 100 times hotter, right? Because there's the person who has, who holds all the keys, and she's the one telling you, no, this is how I like it, baby. And I love that. I mean, that is my, talk about core music, kind of your Danger, Kane Roberts, I mean, that is my fucking brand. And she delivers on it. And I dare say this one album might even be better than everything. And I love Lee Aaron, but I think it might be better than everything Lee Aaron's ever put out. One album, and it's that good. And hot damn, I mean, it is. And she literally does say, actually, in the song Love You Till It Hurts, she says she has a Triple X mind. And I'm like, fuck yeah, baby. But I mean, Armed and Dangerous, there's not a bad song on here. You got to love this kind of cheesy hard rock, and the only reason, so again, she almost won an award for the Album of the Year in Canada, for what that's worth. She basically, this was such a hit that the record company was like, okay, send her to LA and we're going to make her a hit in America. Of course, what happens here, right? Now you can actually, and I do have it, you can get a 6-track demo of what she recorded in LA. And that's every song from those demo sessions are tremendous. All 6. Great. I mean, the album Magnet to Steele, that's 11 tracks on its own. So you got 17 tracks of greatness here overall. But anyway, she went to LA and she started cutting it. And basically, this new album she was going to do. And basically she says, okay, that she didn't want to be this, in her words, sex pot biker chick anymore. So she was wanting to do music that wasn't like all about sex. But I mean, to understand, really, it's like all of these songs are about sex. It's amazing. I love it. Okay. And obviously, as an ally, I completely respect her, not wanting to do that or whatever. I'm glad she gave us what she did, and you can watch some of her videos on YouTube. And I mean, certainly the sex is dripping as much off of that as it is off the music. So I get it. Okay. I get where she's coming from. I mean, honestly, what I think was really happening, we're talking 1993, and what happened in 1993 in the music industry? It completely fell apart. Well, no. Well, yes, that is what happened. But the short way of saying that is Nirvana, right? Nirvana completely killed the music industry. And basically, I mean, I've said this for some time. I mean, that Nirvana effectively, if you're depressed right now about life, you can more or less blame Nirvana for all of it. Economic downturn, movies going to shit, just about everything can be, if you're the kind of person that is like looking for great things within pop culture or any kind of great art or stuff like that, all of that basically had to go underground and live off of the blood of rats. Ever since Nirvana came out. Okay. Because Nirvana basically ended the party, and so I think since Nirvana was such a success, okay. Now there's more I could say on this. I could explore how Nirvana fucked all of this up, and it's a generational thing as well. And I mean, all right, let's be clear here. Ultimately, it comes down to parents, right? But I mean, really, it does. And it comes down to childhood traumas and things like this. There's a lot of things to blame, but Nirvana is, well, I think they're part of the problem because they popularized the symptoms, but they're also symptomatic of, again, the real issue there. But anyway, long story short, Nirvana ended the party. Okay. The happy times, the good times, the extra money in your pocket and all this other stuff. Nirvana took all of that away. But they were, so wildly successful. In fact, just to prove my point, because I get a lot of heat for this when I say this sort of thing. And I've been saying this, you got to understand, I've been saying this for 20 years. I've been saying this since Nirvana came around. I was saying it when Kurt Cobain was still alive. The fucker. Do you want to know what kind of music David Grohl listens to? I'll tell you what kind of music David Grohl listens to. I wouldn't be surprised if he fucking listens to Chrissy Steele. David Grohl listens to Dio. David Grohl listens to Motley Crue. David Grohl listens to everything I listen to and that I love, and that, of all ironies, Nirvana basically, kicked off the shelf. Isn't that kind of weird, that the guy who was so instrumental, pun intended, the drummer anyway, right? Who was so instrumental in killing all of the music, that I'm talking about. He listens to all of that music and like, that's his passion. I mean, just listen to Probot. You know the score. Isn't that kind of weird? Yeah, I think that's pretty fucking weird. I think it kind of proves my point, but anyway, I'm sure I'm going to get emails about this. I can't wait. Or Telegram messages. Anyway. So yeah, at the time, bands were all changing their sound to varying degrees of success. I mean, not that it was all bad. Like I think actually like Def Leppard's Slang, I think it's an awesome album, and they were totally trying to go with the darker edge because of what happened with when Nirvana came on the scene. But I imagine Chrissy Steele probably wanted to do something like that. Like she and really everybody in LA kind of saw, the writing on the wall, as it were, and they were all shifting their sound. And so she wanted to do that instead of be the sex pop biker chick. I get it. Okay. I get it. But what a shame, because I mean, we had one album and then a 6-track demo that was just dynamite. dynamite. Would have loved to have seen what that could have all turned into. And maybe if she got a third, I mean, who knows? Would have been awesome. But instead of, from a scene where, kind of the sex-drenched music was actually like amazingly allowed to be out there and popular, then we got the Depression Fest from those, fucknuts from Seattle. And I'm not talking about Queensryche. So, well, there it is. Anyway, fortunately, this album just like appeared on getmetal.club. And so I downloaded it, and I'm a sucker for these kinds of, I mean, there's other artists like this, and most of them aren't even remotely as good as Chrissy Steele or like Lee Aaron, where, it's like a gal that, I mean, yes, I can admit that the record industry is trying to put out a certain image and whatever, and maybe they're trying to mimic Alita Ford or something along those lines. And, let's be honest, amazingly, somehow Hailstorm pulls this off, right? Because Hailstorm is really the epitome, the culmination of your Chrissy Steele's, Lee Aaron's, Lita Ford's, and so on, right? I mean, Lizzie Hale is a total sex bot biker chick. Not sex bot, well, maybe she wouldn't mind that either, but sex pot biker chick, And I mean, how many times you got to listen to Do Not Disturb to get the fucking message? So somehow it became popular. Maybe it just needed the right writing chops, or, it needed to come from the heart. But I mean, I would argue Lizzie Hale, who, of course, what music does she listen to? This music. I would argue that she just took it all to heart, right? And then just, put it out there with a little more, I guess, of a little more of a modern sound. But regardless, let's just wrap this up. So Chrissy Steele, Magnet to Steel. This is a mind-blowing album to me. I have been listening to it over and over again over the past couple days since I got it. Again, I'm a sucker for this kind of thing, but I did not think, let's check this out. Let's see what this gal's singing about. Maybe she'll have a good song about sex or something in it. I did not expect it to be such a great rocker and such a solid rocker, and one that has both the message and the music itself, the melodies itself are just top notch for this kind of music. Yes, it's cheesy. Yes, the production levels are not at the level of today. No shit. That's the 80s for you, or even the early 90s. But man, does it deliver on that Kane Roberts, Lee Aaron kind of style, and Danger kind of style that really, for me, ultimately might come down to my favorite kind of music. Like I could totally see Chrissy Steele doing a duet with Paul Stanley, and it would have been fucking amazing. So anyway, there you go. Check it out. Chrissy Steele, Magnet to Steel, great stuff. And if you can find her 6-track demo, I recommend that. The LA demos, it's called. I recommend that as well. That's it for your Q&A this week. Gave you a little something extra. Had a lot to talk about within this one. And anyway, more Sovereign Tech to come, and more TIE Fighter Renegades actually to come as well. I will see all of you on the other side.